Remedy Entertainment has established a very strong creative identity. There are certain hallmarks that players have started to look for in a Remedy game. Things like a well-crafted and often complex narrative, recurring characters, a very cinematic presentation, and worlds where the lines between reality and something greater begin to blur. I think that a large part of why Remedy is able to deliver on these expectations is because they've created a very solid foundation that all of their narrative-driven games are built on. All of these games share a certain number of core elements, which are familiar and well-tested, but adaptable enough that they rarely feel repetitive. Once you play through several Remedy games, you might begin to notice some patterns. Over time, these patterns have evolved into the Remedy-connected universe. But beyond the surface-level continuity between some Remedy games, all of their games have a sort of shared visual language, and the stories all follow a similar outline. This all started back in 2001 with the release of Max Payne, and the goal of this video is to show just how much of that Remedy identity was firmly established in that first game, Max Payne, and its sequel, Max Payne 2, the fall of Max Payne. Don't fall. We're good. We're just gonna cut. Big thanks to everyone right over here who is supporting us on Patreon. If you like what we do and you're in a position to help us grow, then even $1 a month goes a very long way for us. Really, it helps a lot. You can also help us at absolutely no charge by subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment and a like. Those things also go a really long way for us, but let's get into the meat of the video. Brief warning, there will be some spoilers for almost every Remedy game here, but I'm not going to be giving any beat-by-beat, thorough plot breakdowns. I'm more just kind of talking about what these games are made up of. A quick note that should go somewhere in this video, I'm going to say all Remedy games a bunch of times throughout this video. I'm not counting all Remedy games. I'm not counting Death Rally or the Death Rally remake or Agents of Storm or Crossfire X or games that haven't yet been released. I'm talking about Quantum Break, Alan Wake, Max Payne, Control, Alan Wake 2, Max Payne 2, those games. The narrative-driven, single-player, third-person games, not the other stuff. Although some of these themes do apply to those other games, I'm just not talking about those games when I say all Remedy games. The first thing I want to tackle is this basic narrative outline that I think all Remedy games follow in one way or another. Starting with Max Payne, that game tells the story of a New York City police officer who loses his family to a violent crime. That officer is Max Payne. Max then joins the DEA, where he goes undercover to investigate a drug trafficking ring that he believes has some connection to the death of his family. The undercover investigation plunges Max into a strange and brutal underworld that winds up shattering every preconceived notion that he had about the case. And beyond that, some of the things that he discovers permanently alter the way he sees the world around him. By the end of that first game, Max Payne is a very different person, and he can never truly return to who he was before he departed on his journey. Remedy and Sam Lake did not invent this formula. It's a tried and true tactic that can be seen in movies like Death Wish or in the origin stories of comic book characters like Batman. It's just a classic take on the hero's journey, where the call to adventure phase is sparked by the loss of a family member. This template has existed for a very long time, and starting with Max Payne, Remedy would go on to use it in all of their games. We have Alan Wake losing his wife Alice and then descending into the dark place, Jack Joyce supposedly losing his brother and then going on a journey to the end of time, Jesse Faden being separated from her brother and then entering the world of the Federal Bureau of Control, and Saga Anderson, potentially losing her daughter and husband as she dives into the story of Return. All of these heroes wind up experiencing things that permanently change them, and even if they are reunited with their loved ones, they still wind up paying a great price and are never able to go back to where it was that they originally came from. So we've established that all of these games follow the same basic template, but beyond that, they also have a lot of shared narrative devices and other elements that are used to tell the stories. Remedy adapts and iterates on these elements from game to game, but their roots are clearly present in Max Payne. You have some big, kinda obvious things like the cinematic presentation of their games. This has been taken to new heights with the live-action segments of Alan Wake 2, but Remedy was creating uniquely stylized cutscenes from the very start. Members of the band Poets of the Fall played some roles in the first Max Payne game, and Max Payne 2 was the first time that the band would provide music for a Remedy game. This tradition has continued, or at least been acknowledged in one way or another, throughout every following Remedy game. Max Payne also established Remedy's practice of having every game open up with a narrator either retelling or introducing the events of the story. Max Payne opens up with Max standing on a rooftop, and he goes on to explain all of the events that brought him to that point. Alan Wake opens up with Alan telling us that the whole story started with a dream. Quantum Break sees its protagonist, Jack Joyce, being interviewed, and that interview acts as a narration throughout the entire game. Control opens up with Jesse Faden seemingly addressing the player, before we find out that she's been talking to Polaris, an entity that she has a sort of psychic connection to. Alan Wake 2 opens up with Alan introducing the story, letting us know that he's speaking to us from the end of the story when he says, "This is not the ending I wanted." Max Payne 2 also utilizes this device, with the story opening up at the end and then jumping around several times before looping back around to that first opening scene. Remedy games also all contain meta-narratives, stories within the stories that echo and mirror one another. Alan Wake 2 has taken this idea and expanded on it in such an intricately layered way that it's often hard to tell which part of which story you're even looking at, but the idea was first present in Max Payne. These secondary or meta-narratives are told through a number of different ways. They can be found in television shows, radio broadcasts, NPC chatter, or various documents found throughout the games. These elements have all become staples of Remedy games, and Max Payne featured all of them. In that first Max Payne game, we're introduced to a show called Address Unknown. The show is a clear reference to Twin Peaks, but it also mirrors some of Max's experiences in the game. The narrator in the show talks about being confronted by a doppelganger, something that Max Payne experiences during a hallucination. This scene where Max is forced to reckon with another version of himself went on to inspire similar scenarios in all future Remedy games. Alan Wake has Mr. Scratch, Jack Joyce has multiple versions of himself throughout time, Jesse Faden fights her own evil doppelganger, and it seems like almost every character in Alan Wake 2 has some other version of themselves that can be found somewhere in the story. In addition to Address Unknown, Max Payne also featured a television show called Lords and Ladies, and a comic strip called Captain Baseball Bat Boy. While some parallels can be drawn between these secondary stories and the main narrative of the game, Max Payne 2 is where Remedy really began to ramp up the sort of intricate layers of echoes and twisted mirrors that we can see in their later games. Address Unknown, Lords and Ladies, and Captain Baseball Bat Boy all make a return in Max Payne 2, along with a new show called Dick Justice. While James McCaffrey has always been the voice of Max Payne, in the first game, Max is portrayed by Sam Lake. In the sequel, Max was modeled after actor Timothy Gibbs, but Sam Lake is still present in the game. He can be seen playing different roles in the in-game television shows. In Max Payne 2, there's an Address Unknown marathon airing, and you'll encounter several episodes of the show throughout the game. The story is about a man named John, who is tormented by his doppelganger, named John Mira. John describes Mira as the devil incarnate. He's a serial killer who is framing John. On a quest to find and confront his doppelganger, John descends into Noir, York City, which is described as a twisted alternate reality where he moves from one grisly murder scene to the next. If you've played Alan Wake 2, then this likely sounds very familiar. I mean, just check out these lines from the show.
I was lost in the streets of Noir, York. The city had swallowed Mira and my girlfriend. I was part of some elaborate game, complex for its own sake. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw a shadow disappearing behind the corner. with a glint of binoculars in a window. They were spying on me, following my every move. When Mira killed again, the map of the city changed. Like a shifting glacier, a new crack appeared with every gunshot. I had abandoned all conventional methods of navigation. I was following the bloody signs he kept leaving me, and he was watching me do it. Wherever I went, the payphones started to ring. Finally, I collected enough courage to answer one.
John, you must run. He's coming after you. He wants to catch you. They're closing in. John, I love you. Don't give up.
While this story clearly went on to influence the plot of Alan Wake 2, it also heavily mirrors parts of the first Max Payne game. And if you play Max Payne 1 and 2 back to back in any order, your perception of the stories within each game is going to be heavily influenced by the events of the other game. This idea of a story influencing future games while also having a retroactive impact on how we perceive the story from a previous game is another core element of Remedy's style that the Max Payne series helped to establish. When it comes to the types of objects, textures, and environments that make up Remedy games, Max Payne introduced a lot of ideas that keep showing up in future games. There are also more storytelling devices and other themes that keep recurring as well, and I'm just going to list a whole bunch of these. First up, the Neighbor of the Beast. Sometimes it's 667, sometimes it's 665, but this number appears in every other Remedy game from Max Payne on. Every Remedy game features the presence of a secret or shadowy organization that acts as a type of invisible hand, influencing parts of society. The Max Payne games introduced us to the Inner Circle, a powerful group of elites akin to something like the Illuminati. Quantum Break had Monarch Solutions, and the current RCU games have the Federal Bureau of Control. Mysterious phone calls are another very prevalent element in Remedy games. The tutorial for Max Payne opens up with him receiving an anonymous call through a payphone, instructing him on how to move forward. This carries over to the actual game, where a member of the Inner Circle contacts Max via payphone to let him know that he's being monitored by them. Alan Wake receives a mysterious call on his cell phone in the first game, and a man on the other end claims to have kidnapped his wife. And a mysterious payphone makes an appearance near the end of the game to help guide Alan along. While Quantum Break didn't really lean too heavily into this trope, Control brought it back with a twist with the hotline calls, and Alan Wake 2 brings it back full circle with the mysterious payphones being a very direct reference to Max Payne 1 and 2. Elevators happen to be another important element in Remedy games. In Max Payne, one of Max's allies, Mona Sachs, disappears into an elevator after presumably being fatally wounded. In Max Payne 2, she reappears, surprising Max when she emerges from an elevator. In the first Alan Wake game, Alan uses an elevator to descend into the well-lit room. Control and Quantum Break both feature several instances of elevators, with the ones in Control containing a direct reference to Max Payne. Alan Wake 2 also prominently features elevators. Now, I know that elevators are super common in video games. They're just a great way to get a player from one part of a level to another. But the fact that the elevator acted as a sort of vehicle for Mona Sachs' resurrection in the Max Payne series gives the elevator a greater significance in future Remedy games, especially when they call it the Payne brand elevator. Remedy is very well aware of the sort of imagery they use, and as the imagery continues to reappear throughout different games, it gains a, greater significance that snowballs and creates its own mythology. The idea of mundane objects taking on greater significance is a major theme of the game Control, where the ubiquity of an object and the idea of what that object represents to a large number of people imbue that object with power. Remedy has many other seemingly mundane objects that can lend themselves to feeling more significant as you see them appear over and over throughout the games. There are things like consoles, mixing boards, tape machines, old video cameras, radios, CRT televisions, and these gas canisters that Remedy seems to be very fond of. Remedy games borrow heavily from Norse mythology, with obvious references like Thor and Odin Anderson, but there are more heavily obscured references in other games. This all goes back to Max Payne, a game where the story often mirrors Norse mythology, and several characters like Alex Balder and Alfred Woden are direct references to figures like Balder and Odin. Max Payne centers around a designer drug called Valkyr, a name inspired by the Valkyries from Norse mythology. While the role of Valkyries in mythology has changed over time, they are often portrayed as female figures who guide the spirits of dead soldiers into Valhalla, a majestic hall overseen by Odin. In Max Payne, Valkyr was developed by the military as part of a secret operation called Project Valhalla. It was a drug given to US soldiers to enhance their combat capabilities. But things didn't go as intended, and the project was officially shut down. Nicole Horn, a former member of that Illuminati-like group, the Inner Circle, secretly continued Project Valhalla and continued to produce the drug. Nicole Horn would be involved in distributing the drug throughout New York City. Max Payne encounters numerous people addicted to the drug, and they all seem prone to hallucinations. You can hear them talking to themselves, muttering or screaming a series of paranoid and disjointed phrases.
You're gonna die. I'm gonna die. It's all messy inside. Blood and puke and crap inside. Here. I think I'm dead. I think I died. I think I'm dead.
This is very similar to the shadows in the Dark Place in Alan Wake 2, which in turn are similar to the Taken, and the Taken went on to inspire the Hiss-affected individuals in Control. People, often hostile, under the influence of some external force, talking what might seem like nonsense to themselves, these are all clearly rooted in the Valkyr addicts from Max Payne. Lines and references to lines from the dialogue spoken by these Valkyr addicts will pop up all over the place in future Remedy games. The letter V can be seen in graffiti all over the world of Max Payne. Graffiti would go on to be another important visual element in other Remedy games. Alan Wake 2 also features these lights that are often arranged to look like a letter V, again recalling the Valkyr graffiti in Max Payne. This V symbol also helped to establish another important element for Remedy: duality. When Max learns about the history of Valkyr and its connection to Project Valhalla, he says,
"There was an old army bunker under the steel mill. I knew the military plaque on the floor. I had seen 1,000 variations of the insignia on crumbling brick walls everywhere in the city. The sword replaced by a syringe. Project Valhalla, V for Valkyr, V for Valhalla. All of a sudden it read like a crackpot conspiracy theory."
This idea of seeing common symbols from a new perspective is yet another core element of Remedy's storytelling. Characters in these games are constantly seeing one thing and then later seeing it again in an entirely different light that gives it all a new dual meaning for that character. Another major Remedy theme rooted in Max Payne is a sense of undeserved infamy. Characters who are either wrongfully accused or framed, who then have to go on to evade the authorities. Max Payne is framed as a killer, with his name and image broadcast on the news. He finds himself on the run from the police, a situation that would be echoed in Max Payne 2, both in the events of the game and in the meta-narrative of Address Unknown. In Alan Wake, former FBI agent Robert Nightingale wrongfully assumes that Alan Wake is responsible for the death of his former partner, and Alan spends a portion of the game on the run from law enforcement. Depending on the choices you make in Quantum Break, Jack Joyce can also find himself framed for crimes he didn't commit, with his name and image broadcast all over the media, and he'll spend a portion of the game trying to evade authorities. Jessie Faden spent a large part of her life on the run from the FBC, an organization that had been monitoring her for years. Eventually, she was compelled to enter an Uneasy Alliance with the FBC, which resulted in her becoming the director. This idea of an Uneasy Alliance is again present in every other Remedy game, and is rooted in Max Payne. Saga Anderson is forced to work with Alan Wake, even though she believes that he put her daughter at risk. Quantum Break is full of characters who have to go out on a limb and team up with people that they can't entirely trust. Early on in the first Alan Wake game, Alan had to work with the man who he believed had kidnapped his wife. In Max Payne, this theme is present when Max has to join forces with Alfred Woden, the de facto leader of the Inner Circle. It's also a major theme of his rocky relationship with Mona Sachs, someone who Max clearly has feelings for, but struggles to fully trust. So hopefully this is all making sense. I kind of feel like I'm just throwing a lot of disparate information and anecdotes out there, but this sort of flood of information and connections and echoes is something that I think a lot of people experience when they play through the Remedy catalog. So it might be a little confusing, but at least it's appropriate for the theme of this video. I hope. While Quantum Break and Control definitely utilize many elements that were first introduced in Max Payne, it's the Alan Wake series that really has the most connections and direct references to Max Payne 1 and 2. Now, that doesn't mean that Control and Quantum Break don't have a lot of their own. I mean, even the character of Zachariah Trench, the former director of the FBC, is clearly an echo of Max Payne. They have the same voice actor. James McCaffrey portrayed Max Payne in Max Payne 3, and the characters have some very similar backstories. But let's focus on Alan Wake for a little while, because there's some stuff here that I think is really cool that if you hadn't played Max Payne 1 and 2, you might have missed these things. So, at 2 points in the first game, Max will find himself dosed with Valkyr, and he'll have some very strong hallucinations. One of these scenes is very similar to a scene from Tom Zane's film, Nightless Night. Another one of these scenes has Max experiencing a flashback that gives him a deeper perspective on the situation that he's in. This is very similar to when Alan drank the Anderson moonshine and had a flashback of his lost week in the cabin. The main antagonist of the first Max Payne game is a woman named Nicole Horn. Max refers to her as the Mystery Hag, or the Witch, very similar to the way that Barbara Jagger was referred to as the Scratching Hag. The use of colored lighting to enhance the mood of a particular scene is something that I think Alan Wake 2 does very well, and it was also used to great effect in the first Max Payne game. Max Payne 2 features a spiral door, and Max sports a head wound, very similar to the one seen on both Alan Wake in the first game and Saga Anderson in Alan Wake 2. There are so many more things that I could mention, and I'm sure there's a bunch that I missed. There's the fact that Alex Casey was actually one of the names originally being considered for the character of Max Payne, or the way that Max receives a phone call that is very reminiscent of the hiss incantation from Control, or the way that both Max Payne 1 and 2 contain scenes where it's suggested to Max that he's stuck inside of a work of fiction. I've mentioned this anecdote in another video, but Max Payne 2 features a scene where Mona Sachs is stuck in a prison cell, begging to get out because she fears that she's in danger. This scene is repeated both in Alan Wake and in Alan Wake 2. These two games contain an abundance of great imagery and ideas that Remedy continues to pull from, whether it's the janitor who guides you along your journey, the giant mascot suit, being put under surveillance, or swapping between protagonists. I think it's great that Remedy and Rockstar are working together to remake these games, but still, in my opinion, the originals hold up really well, and I think it's totally worth your time to play them or replay them while we wait to learn more about the remakes. The first game can be a pain to get running on PC. It often requires a patch to run it at all, but there are lots of easy to follow tutorials out there. I even have one on our second channel here. Max Payne 2 should run without much trouble for most people, but there is a widescreen patch available if you're looking to properly break out of the 4:3 aspect ratio. There are console ports of these games as well, which I don't think are quite as good as the PC versions, but if console is your only option, you're still going to have fun with these games. As far as I know, the current Xbox systems are backwards compatible with the discs for Max Payne 1 and 2, and both games are available to purchase digitally. And PlayStation users can also purchase digital copies of both games, but from everything I've seen, these are not the best ports. The PlayStation 2 versions have some very considerable downgrades when compared to the Xbox or PC versions, but many people still share fond memories of playing these games on the PS2, so if it's your only option, I'd say you gotta go for it. There was also an Android port and a Game Boy Advance port, and maybe I'll get into those in a future video, but for now, I think I've done enough rambling about the importance and impact of Max Payne. If there are more things that this game established that Remedy went on to reuse in later games, leave a comment. I'm sure I forgot a bunch of stuff, and I know I'm leaving things out. It's almost impossible to be exhaustive with these things because sometimes it's very obvious, very blatant things, like, certain sound effects, certain lighting, certain framing, certain phrasings of different lines of dialogue, and other times it's much more abstract and several layers removed. So, you gotta kind of draw a line somewhere when you're talking about all these things. Otherwise, this video would be like 10 hours long. Anyway, thanks for sticking around as long as you did, if you still are, and clearly you are, and I'll see ya in the next video. Bye!